Hello, I'm Ciarán Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you the latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. We switch focus this week to Grassland as we're joined by Dr Philip Creighton to discuss some of the key priorities for April. Philip discusses the key management tasks for April, from grouping up to temporary fencing, with him explaining the impact that this has on grass growth and animal performance. Philip offers some advice on fertiliser application during April and the impact that has on the system. He moves on to discuss planning next year's winter fodder, emphasising the need not only to focus on quantity but on quality silage. We finish up with Philip highlighting the upcoming round of spring grass walks that will be held nationwide. We start off with Philip discussing the current grazing situation we see on farms.
Yeah, so Ciarán, I suppose conditions have been very good. We had, I suppose, some wet weather there in early March, but for most of March and now into early April, conditions have been good. I suppose grass growth over the winter was ahead of normal, which meant that we had, good covers of grass available to the ewes and the lambs as we turned them out. And with the good weather, I suppose utilisation has been good as well. So that has helped big time, I suppose, in being able to utilise that grass.
Certainly the more favourable March than most we've got. And as you said there, we've probably benefited a lot from coming in with good covers and getting good utilisation. So we've hit the start of April in reasonably good condition. I suppose, Philip, we kind of maybe want to focus on what's the couple of key priorities for the coming months. So from a grazing point of view, what is the priority at the moment with most flocks heading towards the tail end of the lambing or some already finished up? Where do we need to focus our grazing management?
The key thing that we can do, Ciarán, is the whole area of grouping up. So as you say, a lot of people have got through the majority of their lambing at this stage. And I suppose, look, we talk about it every year, this idea of minimising the number of groups on the farm and maybe starting to subdivide paddocks and stuff. This year of all years, that's going to be even more important in that all of those concepts really are all aimed at trying to maximise the regrowths. So as we move through the farm, we're allowing the grass plant the maximum amount of time and the maximum potential to regrow, so that we have grass again for the second rotation going into mid-April onwards and into May. And I suppose, look, with the cost of fertiliser and that now, the way things have gone, anything that we can do within our control, there's a lot of things that aren't within our control, but anything that we can do to try and boost grass production and I suppose grass availability to keep ewes in good condition, keep milk production up, which will have a positive effect on lamb performance up to weaning, which will have a positive effect on weaning weights and consequent lamb drafting patterns as we go through the year. That's all impacted by what we do over the next couple of weeks in terms of feeding the ewe in that peak lactation period, so that kind of 4 to 5 week period post lambing, and also the quality of the regrowths in terms of grass then for the second rotation and third rotation when the lambs start grazing as well. So grouping up, basically what do we mean by that? We mean that we try to minimise the number of groups on the farm so that as much of the farm as possible is growing grass at any one time. I suppose the temptation is that we spread sheep out across the farm in very small groups, and that's when lambs are just turned out, from a point of view of making sure that lambs are okay, herding them every day, and that's fine. We need to be able to make sure that fresh lambs are there's no mismothering going on, that it's easy to pick up the ewes maybe that have problems with milk yield or whatever. But as soon as those lambs settle and we can see that there's no issues, we really want to be trying to be combining those smaller groups into bigger management groups, so that number one, it's easier to graze out fields, so that we can move them on to allow that grass to start regrowing, and number two, it's minimising the amount of time that they're in any one area. And that has knock-on effects then, and being able to maybe graze it out that little bit tighter, which will have positive effects on grass quality for the next grazing.
Philip, you threw out a figure before. It might seem overly simplistic, but it's a very useful one to keep in context. when sheep are grazing the field, so we've multiple fields being grazed at one time, effectively the growth rate in that field has been halved by comparison to the field being rested on the same farm. So you really are reducing that growth rate potential.
Yeah, so I suppose, Ciarán, like if sheep are in a field and they're grazing, they're constantly, removing leaves of grass. And if that's happening, the grass plant doesn't have the potential to, photosynthesize, so using energy from heat and light. Whereas if the sheep are gone off of that field and the plant has the opportunity to start producing its new leaves, it has a much greater potential to capture that energy and to put it into grass growth. So that's the whole concept behind rotational grazing and movement of groups.
Look, the other end of that, and you touched on it there, you're actually getting graze out quicker. So we might touch on your targets in a moment, but you're spending less time really at that lower covers and getting on the fresh pick, and you're getting through that rotation a bit quicker probably too, or more effectively anyway. What is the graze out targets like? Where are you aiming to turn in at, Philip, and come out at in April?
So I suppose, as we move into April now, for the first rotation, for the first grazings of fields, we're kind of saying we'd like to graze down to maybe 3.5 to 4 centimetres. That's the idea behind that, is to maybe remove any dead material. And I suppose, look, there is some heavier covers around this year, depending on where you are. And I suppose when fields were closed back in the autumn, as we said, there was good grass growth over the winter. So to be able to clean out maybe some of the poorer quality stuff at the base of some of those swards is going to be important. But as we move into April, then into maybe second rotation stuff, or again, depending on your stocking rate, we're talking about maybe grazing to between 4 to 4.5 centimetres. So if you're more lowly stocked, maybe you don't have to push the sheep as hard. You can graze 4.5. If you're a little bit more highly stocked, you're still going down to 4 centimetres. But again, because you've grazed tight on the first rotation, you can afford to do that without really doing any impacting negatively on the sheep, because it's going to be all green leaf that they're grazing, even at that tighter post grazing height as well. I suppose what we're targeting to go into is your kind of 7 to 8 centimeters, maybe 9 centimeters, which is a maximum of about 1,500, but around target is around 1,200 kilos of grass trimer per hectare, or 7 to 8 centimeters really of grass.
Like, right, we've moved through, we're going to group up and we're dealing with it. In terms of the infrastructure on the farm, we've pushed for a number of years the use of temporary fencing is an effective means of subdividing them bigger areas, and is a good management tool. It probably is even more important this year than any year. There's probably a little bit of reluctance though in getting that set up early in the season. It tends to be more heading towards midsummer we see it appearing on farms. How important is it to get set up early?
Yeah, so I suppose, look, Ciarán, the earlier that you kind of get those rotations going and kind of multiple divisions going, the more grass you're going to grow, or the bigger benefit you're going to reap from it. And I suppose, yes, people maybe that have adopted those systems maybe tend to wait a little bit later into the year to start implementing it. I suppose, again, one of the reasons that we talk about paddocks and even subdivision of paddocks so much is because of the effect that it has on the regrowth potential. And again, in a year where we're going to try and maybe reduce the amount of money we have to spend on fertiliser to grow grass, again, this is a way that maybe we can potentially make up some of the shortfall from the fertiliser side of things, but maybe maintain a similar level of grass growth, just by managing the farm that little bit better in terms of how the grass plant works, how the grass plant grows and goes through its development stages. And if we can understand that and understand that if we can move the sheep through the farm more frequently and give shorter residency periods to allow the grass more chance to recover, that will increase our grass growth rates, and has the added benefit of maintaining higher quality swards, which should help in terms of lamb performance.
Getting set up early and getting them lambs trained to it early is key. Philip, probably the most difficult one we're going to face on farms this year is fertiliser. And maybe we can just bring you around to that at the moment. Like, I know it's very difficult to give blanket fertiliser advice, but its importance now as we head into that second rotation, we've to consider closing up for silage. We'll touch on that in a moment. How much should we go with, Philip, on farms? When should we target, and maybe some of the cost benefit of that?
Yeah, so I suppose looking, as you say, it's kind of impossible to give a one size fits all answer to that question. I suppose a couple of key things about fertilizer. Look, the cost of fertilizer has increased dramatically compared to last year and previous years. I suppose the one thing I would say about it is that we're still going to have to apply some fertilizer to try and maintain a level of grass production which will meet demand. The consequences of not spreading that fertilizer, I feel, is going to be much bigger than in the longer term. If we reduce our fertilizer completely or to too much of an extent, we're going to have implications there in grass availability, which will impact on we'll say yolk condition, milk yield potential, which will have a knock-on effect on lamb performance pre-weaning. And as we've seen before and discussed before, if lambs go to weaning, at lower, lighter weights as a result of poor performance pre-weaning, that has a knock-on effect post-weaning in terms of longer periods to finish, which will impact in terms of how quick we can get lambs off the farm. And again, in a year where concentrate prices are greatly increased and continuing to increase, that could become a very expensive way of finishing lambs in the autumn as well if we had a lot of lambs left. So that's going to be a challenge. This time of year we're going to get the best response rates to apply fertilizer. As we move into April, May, and June. You're looking at response rates as we move into mid to late April now of probably 15 to 20 kilos of grass dry matter grown per every kilogram of nitrogen applied. And as we move into May and June, that's going to increase even further. And I suppose by the time we get to the end of June, early July, up to 3/4 of the grass that we could grow on our farms every year is probably going to be produced. So this is the time of year to try and maximize our responses to fertilizer that is applied, and try and make sure that what we do at this time of year doesn't impact negatively on later in the year, because it's going to be expensive into the autumn as well, and concentrate costs will be expensive. And I suppose the other thing we really need to concentrate on, and again, look, yes, fertilizer is very expensive, but the whole area around planning for winter feed, so silage, hay, whatever it is you're making to feed the sheep for the winter, we really need to make sure that sufficient stocks are conserved to look after them for the winter. And again, because response rates are going to be at their highest now over the next couple of months, put a plan in place to produce enough winter feed. And I suppose where maybe in the past we would have been talking about, picking up some of your winter feed requirements through surpluses, which could be removed from fields and that, because in most situations people are going to be spreading maybe less fertilizer now on the grazing paddocks than they would have in previous years. That surplus isn't really going to be there. So what I would say is plan that you can make sufficient feed from a dedicated silage cut. And there's a useful planner on the Teagasc website there. If you go onto the main page, and there's a section there now called Food and Feed Security. And within that, you'll find a lot of advice around current strategies with regard to fertilizer application and silage planning and that. And there's a useful we'll say silage stock calculator where you can enter the number of ewes you have, and it will calculate, I suppose, the feed requirements, and you can include if you have silage carried over from this year or from last year, which you can build into what you have at hand already, and it'll give you a guide on maybe what you need to produce, and that'll help with your planning for winter 22-23.
That's a link I'll include in the description, and it is vital that is actually taken into account on farms. Like in reality, Philip, a lot of what we do from a management point of view in the next couple of weeks has a huge impact on the rest of the year, and it might be slightly underestimated in many cases.
Yeah, and look at, I suppose none of this is new, Ciarán. I suppose the amount of times we've done a podcast talking about grouping up and temporary fencing and silage planning, but I suppose what's different this year is it has even bigger implications in terms of cost savings. And I suppose even when I'm talking about silage there, it's not just about planning that we have sufficient amounts of silage, it's sufficient amounts of quality silage, because again, as we've talked about, it's not just fertiliser costs that have increased, it's concentrate costs as well. And we could make a lot of silage, but poorer quality silage, and really that's not a cost effective management strategy either, because that's going to require extra concentrate supplementation, which again is going to cost a lot of money. So I suppose what we're trying to say is that while fertiliser is expensive, it's still, to produce grass is the cheapest form of feed to feed the sheep, and to produce high quality grass silage is the second most expensive feed, and anything after that is going to be even more expensive. And that's what we're trying to do at the moment here is get that message across. And I suppose just a plug, we are going to be carrying out a number of farm walks over the next couple of weeks, right throughout April, where we're going to deal with all of these issues around fertiliser planning, silage planning, grazing management, right across the country. And there'll be ads on the website and in the farm and press there over the next few days, where you can see where there'll be an event in your area. And I would encourage people to come along. We'll go through budgets, we'll go through plans, and try and work out maybe what's best for different circumstances.
No, and hopefully they'll be very useful for anyone that wants to attend. Look, it's going to be a challenging couple of weeks. It's going to be a challenging year from the looks of it. Really appreciate the update today, Philip. And again, it's about making some of the very simple actions early in the season.
Thanks, Ciarán.
We're going to have to leave it there for this episode, as Philip has highlighted what we do in the next couple of weeks has a major impact on the overall system for the year. And he's offered some very useful and practical tips for the coming month. I have included a link to that food and fodder security budget. It's at the bottom of the description of the podcast. You'll find a fodder budget in there as well as some other very useful advice, and that will be updated as the year progresses. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for any updates from our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Ciarán Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and listen in to any of our episodes.